You are the keeper of ancient secrets.
The village lay at the edge of an ancient forest, a cluster of mud-walled homes with thatched roofs, smoke rising lazily from small chimneys. Life here was simple. Men worked the fields, women tended to animals and hearths, and children played in the dusty lanes. But always, their eyes flickered nervously toward the dark wall of trees that surrounded them. The forest was more than just a backdrop. It was alive in their minds, full of old spirits, hungry shadows, and secrets better left untouched. Parents warned their children not to wander too far into its depths. "The trees remember," they would whisper, half in fear, half in reverence. The villagers respected the land, but their respect was steeped in superstition. Among these people lived a boy named Chemo. Unlike the other children, he did not laugh loudly in the lanes or chase goats through the fields. Chemo was quiet. His dark eyes often turned toward the forest, as if listening to something no one else could hear. He was slight, wiry, with a calmness unusual for his age. While others ran from the shadows of the trees, Chemo stepped toward them. He would vanish into the forest for hours, sometimes returning only when the sun dipped low. His clothes brushed with leaves, his hands streaked with dirt, and his face glowing with some secret joy. The villagers whispered, "He is a strange child, always wandering with the trees. Perhaps cursed." But Chemo did not care. Within the forest, he felt alive. He would rest his palms against rough bark and close his eyes. In the silence, he heard things others could not. The low groan of branches swaying, the whisper of leaves in the wind, and, if he listened long enough, the deep voices that stirred from the roots beneath the earth. It was not imagination. The trees truly spoke to him. They told him when the soil was thirsty, when rain was coming, when the wind carried the scent of danger. Their voices were slow and patient, like time itself. Sometimes he heard laughter in the rustle of leaves, other times sorrow in the creak of bending trunks. To Chemo, it was a gift. To the villagers, it was madness. Children noticed first. They would follow him at a distance, giggling when he pressed his ear to a tree trunk. "Look, he's talking to wood," they mocked, throwing stones near his feet. When he smiled back, unfazed, they only jeered louder. Soon, parents pulled their children away. "Don't play with that boy," they warned. "He belongs more to the forest than to us." This quiet rejection stung more than the laughter. At night, Chemo would sit alone by the small fire in his family's hut. His mother, a kind woman with weary eyes, would touch his shoulder and whisper, "Don't mind them. The world fears what it cannot understand." But even in her voice, there was worry. His father, on the other hand, grew colder with every passing year. He avoided Chemo's gaze, ashamed of the strange child he had sired. The forest became Chemo's refuge. Each day he went deeper, finding solace in its shadows. He learned its moods, the way the air grew heavy before a storm, the way leaves quivered with thirst in the heat of drought. He could sense when danger lurked, even in the silence, and always the trees welcomed him, their voices rising and falling like a song only he could hear. Yet the whispers also carried warnings. Sometimes, as the wind cut through the canopy, the voices would tremble. "Roots will shake," they murmured. "Shadows will rise." Chemo did not understand, but the words chilled him, echoing in his heart long after he returned home. Back in the village, his difference grew harder to hide. When harvests were good, the villagers ignored him. But when rains came late, or when sickness struck, their eyes turned sharp. "It is the boy," some muttered. "He walks with the forest. The forest watches us because of him." Their fear festered quietly, ready to burst at the first true misfortune. Still, Chemo clung to his secret. For though the world mocked him, he could not turn away from the trees. They were his companions, his teachers, his only friends. When loneliness pressed hard against his chest, he pressed his hands against bark and whispered back, "I am listening. Tell me your stories." And the trees, ancient and patient, would answer. But the seeds of rejection had been planted. Each whisper behind his back, each child's taunt, each parent's warning, all built a wall between him and the people of his village. Though he longed to belong, Chemo was being pushed further and further to the edge, closer to the dark embrace of the forest that alone understood him. And deep within those endless woods, something waited. Something that the trees, in their trembling voices, were already warning him about. The boy who spoke with trees was marked, not only by his gift, but by the fate that would one day test both him and the people who mocked him. The years passed, and with them came sharper tongues and heavier laughter. Chemo grew from a small child into a boy of 10, yet the strangeness that set him apart only deepened in the eyes of the village. Children, once curious, now circled him like a pack of restless dogs. "Tree boy!" they shouted as he walked by, their voices cutting through the dusty air. "Does the wood tell you bedtime stories?" Others clutched sticks and mimicked his voice, bowing to trunks as though they could hear them whisper back. Each insult was followed by laughter, cruel and sharp. At first, Chemo ignored them. He kept walking, his gaze drifting toward the forest, where the trees never mocked or laughed. But the words dug into him like thorns. Some days he fought tears, other days he ran straight into the woods, where the voices of leaves washed over him in gentle comfort. The adults were no kinder. They shook their heads when he passed. "The boy is touched," one farmer muttered to another. "Not right in the head." "It will bring misfortune," said another. "Mark my words, nothing good comes from talking to shadows." These whispers carried weight, pressing on his parents like heavy stones. His mother defended him at first. She scolded neighbors, telling them Chemo was simply different, not cursed. But with each season, her protests grew softer. Her eyes showed the exhaustion of a woman fighting against a tide she could not stop. His father said little, but his silence cut deepest. At the hearth, the man who once lifted him on his shoulders now turned away, staring into the flames as if Chemo were invisible. That rejection burned more than the laughter of children, more than the gossip of villagers. A boy can endure the world's cruelty, but not the cold of his own home. So Chemo drifted further into the forest. There he found peace. He laid his ear against the trunks of oaks and baobabs, listening to their steady songs. The forest became his sanctuary, a cathedral of whispering leaves and sighing branches. The trees told him stories of droughts long past, of storms that had torn their canopies, of roots that tangled with rivers deep underground. Their wisdom was slow, patient, eternal. One day, sitting by a stream that wound through the undergrowth, he heard the willows sigh. The rains will not come soon. The earth will thirst. Chemo dipped his fingers into the water, watching it swirl around his hand, and felt the truth of their words. He carried this knowledge back to the village, but when he spoke, they laughed in his face. "How would you know such a thing?" A man scoffed. "Do your branches tell you?" Another shook his head. "Madness. The boy is cursed. Pay him no mind." Even the children repeated these doubts, throwing pebbles at him when he tried to join their games. "Go back to your trees, tree boy," they cried. His heart ached with longing for their friendship, yet every attempt left him wounded, more certain that he did not belong. Only his mother offered him tenderness. At night, she stroked his hair and whispered, "One day, they will see. One day, your gift will be needed." But her voice trembled as though she was trying to convince herself as much as him. Chemo clung to her words, yet the loneliness weighed heavy. He often sat beneath the forest canopy, knees drawn to his chest, asking the trees why the world hated him. The branches swayed gently, their leaves brushing against him like hands in comfort. But even in their soft whispers there were shadows. The ground trembles far below, the oaks murmured one evening. "Roots will shake," whispered the maples. "Shadows will rise," sighed the pines. Chemo listened with wide eyes, his breath caught in his throat. The voices spoke in riddles, heavy with warning, but gave no clear answers. Still, he carried the unease with him, like a cold wind in his chest. He longed to share what he heard, to warn the village, to be believed. But experience had taught him the truth. They would only laugh, mock, or turn away. And so he swallowed the fear and kept it inside, walking back alone beneath the twilight sky. Isolation wrapped itself around him, heavier with each year. Chemo had become a stranger in his own home, a shadow in his own village. Yet in the depths of the forest, he was not alone. The trees stood with him, whispering secrets of earth and sky, and though he did not yet understand, they were preparing him for the day when those whispers would become the only shield between his people and ruin. For now, the boy who spoke with trees remained mocked, rejected, and unseen. But in the silence of the forest, fate was already stirring. The village had always lived by the rhythm of the seasons: plant, tend, harvest, rest. This was the cycle that gave them food and life. But one year, the rhythm faltered. The rains came late. When they did, it was only a drizzle, not the steady downpour the crops needed. The soil cracked beneath the sun, and tender shoots wilted before they could bear fruit. The once green fields turned pale, brittle, and lifeless. An unease settled over the villagers. At first, they told themselves it was only a bad season, that fortune would turn. But as weeks passed, the wells sank lower, the streams grew thin, and animals bleated hungrily in the night, their ribs sharp against their skin. Fear breeds quickly in hungry bellies. Soon, people whispered of curses and restless spirits. The forest loomed larger in their minds, its dark edge pressing against their thoughts. They recalled every tale of angry gods and vengeful roots, and in every whisper, one name rose again and again: Chemo. It started when he began spending more time with the trees, an old woman muttered at the well. "Yes," another agreed, her voice tight. "He calls storms, he drinks our luck. Why else would the land turn barren?" Others nodded, eager to place blame on something or someone they could see. Chemo felt the change in their eyes. When he walked through the village lanes, conversations fell silent. When he passed children, mothers pulled them closer, as though his shadow might cling to their skin. The forest echoed this fear in its own way. The whispers grew sharper, urgent. When Chemo pressed his hand to a trunk, the voices spoke in fragments that made his heart race. Roots shaken. Shadows rising. The ground stirs beneath. He tried to ask what it meant, but the trees gave no clear answer. They spoke as the earth speaks, slow, tangled, full of meanings too vast for a child to grasp. Still, he understood enough. Something dangerous was coming. One evening, he returned to the village, dust on his bare feet, and tried to warn the elders gathered at the central fire. His voice trembled but carried desperation. "The forest says danger is near. We must prepare. The land itself is troubled." Laughter answered him. One man spat into the flames. "The forest speaks to no one. You bring these lies to frighten us." Another scowled. "What use is a boy's mumbling? Let him keep his nonsense with the trees." The rest shook their heads, some in pity, others in contempt. Chemo stood frozen, shame and frustration burning in his chest. He wanted to shout, to make them understand, but he saw only walls in their eyes. Walls built from fear, pride, and disbelief. So he turned back to the forest, his only refuge. Yet even there, peace was fading. Animals behaved strangely. Birds that once sang at dawn now fell silent. Deer bolted at the slightest sound. The air itself felt heavier, as if the forest was holding its breath. The boy pressed his hand to the roots of a great oak and whispered, "Tell me what is coming." The answer was a groan so deep it shook through his bones. Darkness. Rising. Chemo staggered back, heart pounding. He wanted to run to the villagers, to tell them again, to beg them to listen. But he remembered their laughter, their hard stares, the stones of children. Instead, he sat at the edge of the forest, staring out at the withered fields and hungry faces, caught between the two worlds that both rejected and needed him. The villagers grew restless. Some muttered of leaving for distant lands. Others sharpened tools as though they could fight misfortune with steel. Arguments broke out, louder each night. Hunger gnawed at their patience, and suspicion thickened like smoke. And always, when anger rose highest, their gazes turned toward the quiet boy who walked with trees. The disaster did not arrive with warning trumpets or signs written in the sky. It crept in quietly, like a shadow that thickens until one realizes they are already standing in the dark. It began with the ground. One afternoon, as the villagers tended what little crops remained, a low rumble stirred beneath their feet. At first, they thought it was thunder, though the sky above was pitilessly clear. But the earth did not stop trembling. Pots rattled in the homes. Chickens scattered, wings beating frantically. Children shrieked as the soil split with sudden cracks. Then, from the forest edge, came a sound none had ever heard before. A deep, grinding moan, like 1,000 trees straining under an invisible weight. Birds erupted into the sky in a frenzy, darkening the air. The villagers froze, their fear thick as tar. Chemo knew at once. It was the warning the forest had whispered. His chest clenched. He sprinted toward the trembling woods, even as others called after him in confusion and anger. "Leave him! He's cursed it upon us!" someone shouted. As Chemo crossed into the trees, he pressed his palms against the nearest trunk, gasping. The voice of the forest roared inside his head. Not a whisper now, but a cry of pain. Roots torn, rivers broken. Beware what sleeps below. He stumbled back, eyes wide. Something beneath the earth itself was shifting. The disaster broke fully that night. Dark clouds rolled in, heavy and swollen. Lightning split the sky, but no rain fell. Instead, winds screamed through the valley, ripping thatched roofs and scattering embers from hearths. Fires sprang up where sparks fell. Crops that had clung stubbornly to life were flattened in minutes. Then came the beasts. Driven by the forest's chaos, wild animals fled into the village. Boars crashing through fences, snakes slithering into homes, birds striking blindly as if fleeing unseen terrors. Goats bleated and tore free of their ropes, trampling gardens. Dogs barked madly, unable to defend against the swarm. The villagers panicked, their screams filling the night. Men swung spears wildly. Women dragged children to higher ground. Elders fell to their knees in prayer. Chaos ruled, and amidst the madness, the whispers of blame sharpened. "It's the boy! He's called the forest against us! Find him! Stop him!" Chemo, hidden among the trees, felt the forest's agony bleed into his own heart. He pressed his forehead against a trunk slick with rainless dew, whispering, "What do I do? How do I help them?" The answer came broken, fragmented, as if the trees themselves were gasping for air. "Hold them, guide them. Only through us can they stand." He didn't fully understand, but he felt the weight of the truth. The villagers could not fight this disaster with their own hands. The forest was not the enemy. It was warning. It was ally. If only they would listen. By dawn, the village was unrecognizable. Ash smeared the air, fields lay flattened, and wounded animals limped through streets of scattered belongings. Several homes had collapsed, and the central meeting fire was nothing but blackened stone. The people gathered in misery, their faces gray with exhaustion and fear. And in their brokenness, anger surged. One man raised his fist. This curse began with the boy. The forest is his master. He has brought its wrath upon us. Murmurs rose, voices agreeing, clinging to the comfort of blame. Yes, drive him out. Better yet, bind him before he summons more. The crowd seethed. Mothers held crying children, fathers clenched weapons, and elders nodded grimly. Chemo stood at the forest's edge, watching. He wanted to run forward, to cry out, "I warned you! I begged you to listen!" But fear pinned his feet. He was still a child, and every face that turned toward him was filled not with trust, but with suspicion sharp enough to cut. And yet, behind their anger, he saw something else. Desperation. They were drowning in fear, clutching for someone to save or someone to sacrifice. The forest whispered faintly, tired now, "Hold fast, child. The first storm has passed, but more will rise." Chemo closed his eyes. The first disaster had struck, leaving ruin in its wake. And he knew this was only the beginning. The village bore the scars of the disaster like open wounds. Charred beams jutted from collapsed homes, fields lay flattened, and the air smelled of ash and damp earth. Hunger pressed heavier with every passing day, and the people's eyes grew sharp with mistrust. And always, that mistrust found its target in Chemo. Whispers chased him wherever he went. "There he is. Don't look him in the eye. He calls storms. Keep the children away." Children who once mocked him now stared from behind their mother's legs, fear replacing cruelty. Men who once ignored him now tightened their grips on spears whenever he passed. Even the elders, once content to dismiss him as a foolish boy, now regarded him with heavy silence, as though weighing what punishment might ease their people's dread. Chemo felt the weight of their eyes pressing down like stones. The loneliness that had haunted his childhood now grew into isolation sharp enough to wound. He turned more and more to the forest, finding solace in the voices of roots and branches. Though even those voices trembled with unease, the forest was not well. The great trees spoke of sickness in the soil, of roots cut by unseen hands, of water diverted and poisoned. Creatures fled deeper into the woods, muttering in restless fear. Even the wind carried a sharpness that did not belong. One night, as Chemo pressed his palm to a towering cedar, he heard it clearly. Something stirs within the forest. Not storm, not hunger, a hand that twists, that breaks. Chemo's heart hammered. He had always believed the forest was alive, wild but benevolent. Now it whispered of something darker, something moving through it, turning its power against the people. But when he tried to warn the villagers, they would not hear. He went to the council fire, his voice trembling but urgent. "The forest is being harmed. Something is twisting it. The disaster was not its will. It was a warning. Please, we must listen." Silence met him at first. Then a bitter laugh from a farmer who had lost his goats. "Listen? You ask us to listen to trees when my children go hungry?" Another spat on the ground. "The boy seeks to protect his demons. He lies to us." Even one of the elders, face lined with weariness, spoke gravely. "If the forest truly speaks to you, then it has made you its servant. That makes you more dangerous than the storm itself." The words struck like a blow. Chemo felt the crowd's anger shift, heavy and dangerous. Hands twitched on spear shafts. Someone hissed, Bind him before he brings more ruin! Fear surged in Chemo's chest, but so did defiance. He wanted to shout, to make them see that he was not their enemy. Yet he saw no understanding in their faces, only hunger, grief, and a desperate need to lay blame. That night, he did not return to the village. He stayed in the forest, curled at the base of an old oak, listening to the whispers that still welcomed him. The forest wrapped him in murmurs like a wounded parent. "Hold, child, your time will come." But even there he felt the shift. Not all the voices were gentle anymore. Some whispered harshly, broken, like trees cracking under unseen pressure. And in those whispers, he caught glimpses of something unnatural. Roots bleeding sap like wounds, shadows moving where no wind stirred, a force feeding on fear. Chemo realized the truth with a shiver. What threatened the village was not just drought or storm. It was something born of the forest itself, twisted and hostile, feeding on division. And the villagers, blinded by suspicion, were walking straight into its grasp. The days after the storm grew heavier, as though the air itself had thickened. Crops that once clung stubbornly to life began to wither at their roots. Even the soil, usually rich and dark, turned pale and brittle beneath the farmer's hands. Wells yielded less water, and what little trickled up carried a bitter taste, like metal. The people grew restless. Hunger gnawed at their bellies, and fear sharpened their tongues. Every misfortune, every failed harvest, every sick child was laid at one boy's feet. Chemo, he tried to stay hidden, slipping from the edges of huts into the cover of trees. But still he heard them. "The boy is cursed. He brings ruin. Why do we let him stay?" His heart ached with every word, yet deeper than the pain of rejection was a heavier burden. The knowledge that the forest itself was unraveling. One evening, drawn by a pull he could not name, Chemo ventured deeper into the woods than ever before. The sky was bruised purple, and the forest floor glowed faintly in the twilight. The deeper he walked, the stranger the silence grew. No bird song, no rustle of small animals, only the groan of trees shifting against a wind that did not exist. At last, he came to a clearing ringed by towering oaks whose trunks twisted unnaturally, as though writhing in pain. Their bark was blackened in streaks, and thick sap bled down their sides like tears. Chemo reached out, trembling, and pressed his palm against one of them. The voice that filled his mind was not the gentle whisper of the woods he knew. It was deeper, older, carrying both sorrow and warning. "Child of whispers, something stirs beneath us," Chemo gasped, pressing closer. "What stirs? Tell me," the oak's voice cracked like breaking branches. "A spirit long buried, born of greed, fed by neglect. For ages it slept, bound in the dark earth. But now the roots are weak, the soil is broken. The people's hatred feeds its rise. Shadows rise with it." Chemo's blood ran cold. "A spirit? You mean it is alive?" "Alive and hungry." The words shuddered through the wood. "It drinks the sorrow of men. It feasts on their fear. With every curse spoken against you, it grows stronger." Chemo staggered back. The villagers' scorn, their anger, their fear. It was feeding this thing. Their rejection of him, their blindness to the land's pain, had become the spirit's weapon. He fell to his knees, clutching his head. How could he fight something born from their hatred? The forest murmured all around him, voices overlapping like a storm of whispers. Some begged him to stand strong. Others moaned in terror. And underneath it all was a darker thread, an echo that did not belong, a cold, hollow laugh, rustling through the roots like a snake. Chemo pressed his hands over his ears, but the sound was inside him now, twisting his thoughts. "They will never love you," it whispered. "You are their curse. Their hatred is mine, and soon I will have them all." "No, Chemo shouted into the night, tears burning his eyes. "You will not take them." But the spirit's laughter only deepened, sinking into the soil. The next day, Chemo tried once more to warn the village. His voice shook as he spoke before the gathering of farmers and elders. "There is something beneath the forest. An old spirit, dark and hungry. It feeds on anger, on fear. If we keep turning against one another, it will rise and destroy us all. Please, you must listen." The villagers stared at him in silence. Then the murmurs began. Madness. More lies. Now he blames spirits for our suffering. One of the elders rose, face hard as stone. "You ask us to believe in fairy tales while our fields die? Enough, boy! Your tongue brings only fear." Another farmer stepped forward, shaking with rage. "My son is sick. My goats are dead. And still you dare to stand here with your stories? If you truly cared for us, you would leave and take your curse with you." A chorus of voices joined in agreement. "Yes, banish him. Drive him out." Chemo's chest tightened. He turned to his father, standing at the edge of the crowd, searching desperately for a spark of defense, of love. But his father's eyes slid away, full of shame. His mother wept quietly, torn between rushing to his side and being dragged back by fearful hands. In that moment, Chemo knew the spirit was winning. It had planted itself in the cracks of their fear, growing stronger with every word, every curse. He wanted to scream, to plead, but his throat closed with grief. All he could do was back away, step by trembling step, until the shadows of the forest swallowed him again. And there, in the quiet of the trees, the whispers returned, not soft and soothing this time, but urgent and heavy with sorrow. "Child of whispers, the danger is upon you. The shadow grows. You must choose who you are to be, the bridge that saves them, or the wound that breaks them." Chemo stood trembling, tears cutting tracks down his face. He was only a boy, unwanted and alone. But deep in the soil, something vast and terrible stirred, waiting for the moment to break free. And Chemo was the only one who could hear its hunger. The days that followed were heavy with silence. The forest whispered warnings every night, but in the village, only suspicion grew louder. Livestock sickened, and whole patches of crops rotted overnight. The people's patience broke like brittle straw. At first it was whispers again, mothers pulling their children away when Chemo passed, farmers glaring as though his very shadow poisoned the soil. Then whispers turned to jeers. "Tree boy brings death. He speaks to shadows. He must go before the village is ruined." Chemo tried to keep his head down, his bare feet carrying him along the forest paths he loved. Yet no matter where he went, hatred followed him like smoke. One afternoon, the anger boiled over. A group of boys he had once played with, years ago before the mocking began, cornered him near the well. Their faces were twisted not with laughter, but with something darker, the hunger to blame. "You did this," one spat, flinging a stone that struck his shoulder. "You cursed our fields." Another shoved him hard. "If you love the trees so much, go live with them. Don't come back." The others joined in, hurling stones and words sharper than blades. "Cursed! Mad! Leave us!" Chemo shielded his head with his arms, tears stinging his eyes, not from pain, but from the hollow in his chest. These were the boys who once raced with him in the meadow, who once shared bread with him beneath the shade of oaks. Now their laughter was gone, replaced with cruelty. He ran, not toward home, but toward the forest. That evening the elders called a gathering. Every villager came, torches burning like angry stars around the square. Faces were gaunt with hunger and twisted with desperation. The air smelled of smoke and fear. The head elder raised his voice. "We have suffered storm, famine, sickness, and always the boy is near, always whispering to trees, spreading fear. We cannot suffer him any longer." Murmurs surged into shouts. Cast him out. Drive him into the woods. Let him join his spirits. Chemo's mother clutched him, her tears soaking his hair. He is just a child. He is my son. You cannot. But rough hands pulled her back. She fought like a lioness, but the crowd was stronger. Chemo's eyes darted through the mass of faces until they found his father. For a heartbeat, hope flickered. Surely his father would speak, would defend him. But his father looked away, jaw clenched, eyes full of shame. The silence was louder than any word. Chemo's heart broke. The decision was swift and cruel. By dawn, he will be gone, the elder declared. Exiled from this place. If he returns, he will be met with stones. The crowd roared in agreement, their fear disguised as courage. That night, Chemo walked alone into the forest. His feet left no sound on the earth, and the trees seemed to lean toward him, their branches trembling with sorrow. Behind him, the village torches burned, a world that had cast him out. Ahead, the woods opened, dark but welcoming. The whispers rose all around him. Not mockery this time, but comfort. Child of whispers, you are not alone. Come deeper. We will show you the truth. Chemo stepped forward, tears streaking his face, his heart torn in two, abandoned by his people, yet embraced by the forest. And so, the boy who spoke with trees left behind the world of men, carrying only sorrow and the faint hope that the trees would give him the belonging he had never found among his own. The forest welcomed him as no human voice ever had. The moment Chemo crossed into its deeper heart, the air changed. Cooler, softer, humming with unseen life. The branches swayed, though no wind touched them, as if bowing to him. Shadows that might have frightened others seemed to open into pathways, guiding his steps. He walked until the village torches were only a memory. Around him, the trees glowed faintly in the moonlight, their leaves shimmering with silver veins. The forest floor pulsed with light, as though the earth itself had a heartbeat. For the first time in his life, Chemo felt he was not intruding. He belonged. At the center of an ancient grove he stopped. A ring of massive oaks towered around him, their trunks thick as houses, their crowns vanishing into the night sky, their roots twisted together like clasped hands, forming a living circle. Chemo placed his palm on one root, and immediately the voices rose. Not whispers now, but a chorus. Deep and resonant, they filled his chest, his bones, his soul. Child of whispers. We have waited for you. Chemo trembled, eyes wide. Waited? For me? The forest's voice rolled like distant thunder. Yes, you are the bridge between man and earth. The people mocked what they did not understand, but we see. You hear us. You feel us. Through you, we may yet be saved. His heart pounded. The weight of exile still ached, but here, in the circle of ancient giants, that pain was softened by something deeper. Acceptance. You are chosen, the trees continued. Our covenant is with you. If you stand, we stand. If you fall, we fall. Together, we may resist the darkness rising beneath the soil. Tears spilled down Chemo's cheeks, not from sorrow, but from a swelling sense of belonging he had never known. He was no curse, no mistake. He was needed. Chemo pressed his forehead to the roots, whispering, I will not fail you. The grove pulsed with light, as if the forest itself had drawn him into its heart. In that moment, he was no longer a lonely boy. He was the forest's son. It began with a tremor. At first, the villagers thought it was thunder rolling over the hills. But the sound did not fade. The earth itself shuddered beneath their feet, rattling doors, toppling clay pots, sending goats and chickens scattering in panic. Then the ground split. From the fields rose thick black roots, twisting and writhing like serpents. They tore through crops, ripping the soil apart. The last of the season's food vanished beneath a tide of darkness. Screams filled the night. Men grabbed axes, women clutched their children, but every swing of a blade only bounced harmlessly against the roots. The air turned foul, heavy with smoke and rot. The very breath of the village seemed poisoned. Fire burst where no flame had been lit. Thatched roofs caught like dry straw, and smoke rolled through the sky. Animals shrieked as they bolted into the night, only to be swallowed by the earth's gaping cracks. And then came the voice. It was not human. It was not of this world. A hollow, rumbling growl rose from beneath the soil, spreading through the roots and echoing across the fields. I am hunger. I am the shadow you fed with fear. Now I rise. The villagers collapsed to their knees, covering their ears, but no hand could block the sound that roared inside their skulls. Panic tore through the crowd. Neighbors shoved one another aside, each scrambling to save their own. Parents dragged children into the woods, only to stumble back, for the trees themselves groaned with pain, their bark splitting as black veins spread across their trunks. The people who had once mocked chemo now screamed for salvation, but none came. Their shouts were drowned beneath the cracking of earth and the spirit's endless laughter. In the distance, beyond the smoke and chaos, a figure moved. Chemo. He had felt it. The spirits awakening. The cries of the trees, the soil breaking open in torment. Every whisper of the forest had led to this moment. His chest tightened with sorrow, but also with resolve. These were the people who had cast him out, yet they were still his people. He could not abandon them. Chemo stepped out from the edge of the burning woods, his eyes glowing with the reflection of fire. For the first time, the villagers saw not a cursed boy, but something greater, something the forest itself had chosen. The village burned. Smoke clawed at the sky while the earth writhed beneath a nest of blackened roots. The villagers scattered in terror, their cries sharp against the roar of flames and the spirit's hollow laughter. Through the chaos, Chemo stepped forward. His small frame looked fragile against the fury of nature unleashed, yet the air around him pulsed with something unseen. The forest moved with him. Branches swayed though the night was still. Roots shifted beneath his feet as if guiding his path. He lifted his hands, trembling but steady in his resolve. "Listen to me," he whispered, though his voice carried like thunder, borne on the breath of the trees. "I am here," the spirit answered with a bellow, shaking the ground. Roots surged toward the village, tearing through walls, toppling homes. But before they struck, a wall of trees bent low, their trunks weaving together to shield the people. Branches lashed like whips, driving back the darkness. Gasps rose from the villagers. They saw the boy they had mocked now standing as their protector, commanding the very woods they had feared. Chemo's chest burned with strain, but the whispers of the forest filled him, steadying his spirit. "We are with you. Stand, child of whispers. Stand," he pressed forward, guiding villagers with sweeping motions of his arms. "Run to the river," he cried. Trees groaned and bent aside, opening paths. Roots rose as bridges across broken ground. For every wave of destruction, the forest answered with a shield. Yet still, the spirit would not yield. Its laughter became a howl, and a massive shadow burst from the earth. A monstrous shape of roots and ash, eyes like burning coals. Its voice rattled the sky. "You cannot bind me, boy. You are nothing." Chemo's knees shook, fear clawing at his heart. But he remembered the grove, the covenant, the truth spoken by the trees. He was not nothing. He was their bridge. "The only way," the forest whispered, sorrowful and resolute, "is sacrifice. The spirit feeds on what is broken. To bind it, you must give what is pure." Chemo's heart clenched. He understood. His life, his soul, was the offering. Tears filled his eyes, but his voice was steady. If that is the cost, I give it. He stepped forward, arms outstretched, his body glowing faintly as the forest poured its strength into him. Vines wrapped his wrists, not as chains, but as bonds of love. Leaves spiraled around him like a crown. The villagers watched in stunned silence as Chemo's form shimmered with light. For the first time, they saw him not as cursed, but as chosen. With a cry that was both human and more, Chemo called upon every whisper of the forest. Roots erupted from the ground, wrapping the monstrous spirit. Trees bent, their branches thrust deep into the earth, pinning the darkness. Rivers surged, flooding its fiery veins. The spirit shrieked, thrashing against its prison. But Chemo pressed on, pouring every heartbeat, every breath, every piece of himself into the binding. "I am not your curse," he cried, voice breaking. "I am your end." With one final surge, his body dissolved into radiant light, flowing into the roots, the soil, the trees. The forest roared alive, green and fierce, sealing the spirit beneath the earth once more. Silence followed. The flames died. The ground stilled. The blackened roots sank back into the soil. But where Chemo had stood, there was no boy, only a young oak, its trunk slender but strong, leaves glistening as though touched by tears. The villagers fell to their knees, their hearts heavy. They had lost the child they mocked, yet gained a savior whose sacrifice had spared them all.